had a picture in my head of what that Tuesday would look like. I'd pull into the driveway around noon. My wife would hear the truck and come to the door. My mother would be sitting at the kitchen table of our house in Knoxville, probably doing that thing she does where she folds and refolds the same dish towel while she talks. My father would shake my hand and then pull me in like he always does. That one-armed grip that means more than most people's hugs. 3 months driving long-haul routes through the Northwest, and all I wanted was that. The ordinary of it. The specific quiet of being home. What I got instead was a voicemail. I was somewhere outside of Boise when my phone buzzed. I just pulled into a rest stop to eat a sandwich and check in with my wife. The voicemail was from my mother. Her voice was so flat it didn't sound like her at first. She said there had been a flood, 3 days of rain. Then the creek behind their house in Harlan County came up fast overnight and took most of the first floor. She said she and my father had gotten out. She said they were fine. She said not to worry. Then she said they were staying in the truck. I called her back immediately. She didn't pick up. I called my father. Same thing. I called my wife, Nora. She answered on the second ring. I was going to call you, she said. What do you mean they're staying in the truck? Why aren't they at our house? There was a pause. Not a long one, but long enough that I knew something was wrong before she said a single word. I've been thinking about that, she said. And it's not a good time right now. I've got the Hendersons coming for dinner on Saturday, and your father, you know how he is with the thermostat. Nora. I'm just saying it would be a lot, Damon. They're not helpless. Your mother could call someone from their church. There are resources. I sat in that rest stop parking lot in Idaho for a long time after I hung up. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't hit the steering wheel. I just sat there watching an 18-wheeler pull back onto the highway and tried to understand what I had just heard. My parents had lost almost everything they owned to a flood. They were in their late 60s, sleeping in a Ford F-150, and my wife, the woman I had been married to for 14 years, was worried about the dinner party. I called my mother again. This time she picked up. She sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I asked where they were parked. She told me they'd driven up to a Walmart lot in Corbin. They'd been there 2 nights. My father had gone inside and bought a blanket because the one they grabbed on the way out was still damp from the water. He bought a blanket at a Walmart because he was sleeping in a parking lot at 68 years old. My mother said we don't want to be a burden. I think about that sentence more than almost anything else. Here is what you need to understand about my parents. My father, Irving, spent 31 years working maintenance at a textile mill. He went in before sunrise every morning. He never missed a shift that I know of, not once. My mother, Ruth, cleaned houses on the weekends when I was a kid to make sure I could play baseball, because the registration fee was $40 and they didn't have it otherwise. They are not people who ask for things. They're not people who show up somewhere expecting to be taken care of. The fact that they had driven 4 hours to Knoxville in a flood-damaged truck with a garbage bag of clothes means they had nowhere else to go, and they were too proud to say it outright. And my wife sent them to a parking lot. I didn't tell my mother what Nora had said. I told her to stay where she was, that I was coming home, that I was going to figure everything out. I told her to go inside the Walmart and buy whatever they needed and I'd pay for it. She started to protest and I said, "Mom, please." She got quiet. She said, "Okay." I drove 26 hours straight with 1 stop for gas and a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. I had a partner on the route, but he'd gotten off in Salt Lake City for a family thing, so it was just me. My eyes hurt by the time I crossed into Tennessee. I had the windows down even though it was cold because I needed the air on my face to stay alert. I kept thinking about the blanket. My father buying a blanket in a Walmart at 11 at night because my wife wouldn't open the door. I got home at 6:45 in the morning. Nora was still asleep. I showered, changed clothes, and drove to Corbin. My father was already awake, sitting in the driver's seat with the door open and a cup of gas station coffee in his hand. He's a big man, my father, broad through the shoulders in a way that used to make me feel safe when I was small. He looked smaller than I remembered. That was the first thing I noticed. He looked like the truck was holding him up instead of the other way around. He stood up when he saw my truck and I got out, and we didn't say anything for a moment. He nodded once, the way he does, and I put my arms around him and he made that sound that men like my father make when they're trying not to cry. This low exhale through the nose like they're pressing something down. My mother came around from the passenger side. She had her coat on and her hair done, which is just who she is. She'd do her hair in a hurricane. She was holding a photograph in her hand, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag. My brother Danny had died 7 years ago, a stroke at 43, nobody saw it coming, and she had grabbed his senior picture off the wall on her way out the door when the water started rising. That was all she had saved, that photograph in a plastic bag. I couldn't speak for a few seconds. We got in my truck and I took them to a diner in Corbin and bought the breakfast, real food. My mother ate like she hadn't eaten since the flood, which maybe she hadn't, not a real meal. My father drank 3 cups of coffee and told me about the water, how fast it came, how they'd woken up to it already on the stairs. They'd gone out a second-floor window and down the side of the porch roof in the dark. My mother had grabbed Danny's picture. My father had grabbed her hand. That was it. After breakfast, I drove them to Knoxville. I had already decided what I was going to do. I wasn't going to have a fight in a parking lot. I wasn't going to call Nora from the road and give her time to prepare. I was just going to bring my parents home and put them in the guest room and see what happened. Nora was in the kitchen when we walked in. She had her coffee and she was looking at something on her phone. And when she heard the door, she looked up. And for just a moment, a fraction of a second, I saw something move across her face. Not surprise. She knew I was coming. It was something closer to calculation, like she was figuring out how this was going to go. She said hello to my parents. She was polite. She asked if they wanted coffee. My mother thanked her. My father said no, he was fine. There was that particular stillness in the room that happens when everyone knows something is wrong and nobody is saying it. I set my parents' garbage bag of belongings in the hallway and said, I'm going to get the guest room set up. Nora followed me down the hall. She closed the door behind her and said quietly, You should have called me. I did call you, I said, 3 days ago. You know what I mean. I stopped making the bed and turned around. She was standing near the door with her arms crossed, not angry exactly, more like she was bracing for something. 14 years. I kept thinking that. 14 years and I didn't know this woman at all. I said, They had nowhere to go, Nora. She said, I understand that, but we have a routine here, and this house isn't really set up for. They're not house guests, I said. They're my parents. They got out of a flooded house in the middle of the night with the clothes on their backs. They slept in a parking lot for 4 days. There are shelters, I said. My parents are not going to a shelter. I'm just saying there are options, I said. I need you to hear what I'm saying to you. My parents are staying here, in our house, in the guest room, until I figure out what comes next. That is not a discussion. She looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded once, turned around, and walked out. My parents stayed 3 weeks. In those 3 weeks, I watched my wife move through the house like my parents were furniture she had to walk around. She was never cruel to them directly. I want to be accurate about that. She didn't say anything unkind to their faces. But she stopped cooking dinner, which she had always done every night, because suddenly she was too tired. She stopped sitting in the living room in the evenings. She started going to bed at 9 o'clock. She made the house feel like a waiting room. My father noticed. He didn't say anything. My father never says anything. But I saw him watching her sometimes when she left a room. That careful way he has of cataloging things. My mother started apologizing every morning. I'm sorry, I feel like we're in the way. I'm sorry I can cook. Just tell me what you need. I'm sorry we won't stay much longer. I stopped being able to sleep through the night because I'd lie there thinking about my mother apologizing every morning for existing in my house. The thing that broke it was a Wednesday. I'd come in from the driveway around 5 and found my mother sitting at the kitchen table alone. She was doing that thing with the dish towel, folding and refolding. My father was in the guest room. I could hear the television. My mother looked up when I came in and smiled. But it wasn't her real smile. It was the smile she uses when she's managing something. I asked where Nora was. My mother said, "She went to her sister's for a few days. She said she needed a break." I sat down at the table. A break. 14 years, and my wife needed a break from having my flood-displaced parents in the guest room. I want to be clear about the next thing I'm going to say because it matters. I did not make a decision in anger. I made it in the most quiet, clear-headed moment I'd had in years. I sat at that kitchen table across from my mother while she folded the dish towel, and I thought about who I was and what I valued and what kind of man I intended to be, for however many years I had left. I thought about my father on the roof of that porch in the dark. I thought about Danny's photograph in a plastic bag. I thought about my mother saying I don't want to be a burden. Then I called a lawyer. His name was Alan Fredericks, and he had an office downtown that I'd driven past 100 times without ever thinking I'd go inside. I explained the situation. He explained my options. Tennessee is an equitable distribution state, which means assets are divided fairly but not necessarily equally. The house was in both our names. I had more assets than Nora from before we married, which would be factored in. He said we'd need to establish a timeline and get some documentation together. I made an appointment. When Nora came back from her sister's, I was sitting in the living room. My parents were in the guest room. I told her I wanted to talk. She sat down across from me with that careful expression. I told her I'd spoken to a lawyer. She went still in a way I'd never seen before. Not angry, not sad, just very still, like a person who has been waiting for something and finally hears it. She said, "Because of this? Because of your parents," I said. "Because of what I learned about you. Because of my parents." She said, "That's not fair." I said, "My father bought a blanket at a Walmart in November because you wouldn't open the door. I think we have different definitions of fair. We talked for 2 hours, not a fight, more like an accounting. Things said plainly that it needed to be said for longer than I'd admitted to myself." She cried at one point. So did I. Briefly, which surprised me. 14 years is not nothing, even when you've come to the end of it. We filed paperwork 3 weeks later. She kept the house. I had more liquid assets, and the math worked out that way with Alan's guidance, and I found a place to rent about 15 minutes from where we'd lived. 3 bedrooms. My parents took one. I want to tell you about the day we moved in, because it's the part of this story that I go back to the most. My father carried boxes for 4 hours straight. The man is 68 years old and had been sleeping in a parking lot 2 months earlier, and he carried boxes for 4 hours like it was nothing. At one point, I told him to sit down and rest, and he looked at me like I had said something in a foreign language. My mother unpacked the kitchen while we moved everything else, because she said she works better when she knows where the plates are. By late afternoon, she had hung Danny's photograph on the wall in the hallway, reframed with glass from Target on the first nail my father drove. That was the moment. I was coming in from the truck with the last box, and I saw it hanging there. Danny at 17 in his maroon graduation cap, grinning that grin he had, and I stopped in the doorway. My mother was in the kitchen. I could hear her talking to my father about whether the coffee maker went on the left or right of the window. Normal. Ordinary. The specific noise of people being home. I stood there for a minute, and I let myself feel it. All of it. The grief that had been sitting in my chest since the parking lot in Corbin. The anger. The relief. The strange, clean feeling of having done a hard thing and come out the other side of it, still knowing who I am. My mother called from the kitchen. "Damon, do you want coffee?" I said yes. I put the box down and I went and sat at our table in our kitchen while she made coffee. And my father argued with her about the placement of the coffee maker, which is a conversation they have been having in every kitchen they've ever shared since 1978. He thinks it goes on the right. She's never agreed with him once in 46 years of marriage. I thought, this is the thing you cannot replace. This is the thing you choose when you have to choose. I'm 53 years old. I've been divorced for 8 months. My parents live down the hall, and my mother still makes coffee every morning and argues about where the coffee maker belongs. My father's health has been good. We took a weekend trip to the Smokies in October. First time he'd been in years, and he walked the whole lower trail without stopping. Just pointed at things and named them the way he always has. That ridge. Those trees, that kind of hawk, the way he used to when I was 8 years old, walking beside him. Some people have asked if I regret how it ended. The marriage. I'll tell you the same thing I told Alan when he asked something similar, maybe trying to make sure I was thinking clearly. I said, I regret that I didn't know sooner, but I don't regret what I did when I finally did know. There is a difference between the life you thought you were building and the life you were actually in. When the flood came, I found out which one I was living. I'm grateful it came when it did, even though I wish my parents hadn't had to be the ones to show me. My father is in the next room right now. I can hear the television, some game show he's been watching every evening since we moved in. My mother turned in early. Danny's photograph is in the hallway. Tomorrow morning she'll make coffee and they'll argue about the coffee maker, and I'll sit at the kitchen table and drink it and feel like exactly who I am supposed to be. That's the whole story. That's all of it. And it's enough. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in any mystical sense. I'm a practical man. I drive trucks for a living. I believe in what I can see and measure, but I do believe that who you are in the hard moments is the result of every small choice you made in all the easy ones. And I think what happened with Nora was exactly that. Not one dramatic betrayal, but a long accumulation of small decisions she had made, probably without even noticing, about what mattered and what didn't. The flood just made the result visible. My father spent 31 years going in before sunrise. My mother cleaned other people's houses so I could play baseball. Those are not dramatic gestures. Those are just Tuesday, repeated 1,000 times. That's what built the people they are. And when the water came up the stairs in the dark, my father grabbed my mother's hand, and my mother grabbed Danny's photograph, and they got out. No one who lives the way they've lived ends up being a different kind of person in a crisis. You get what you built. I think about that when I look at my own life now. I'm 53. I don't have unlimited runway left to be careless about who I'm becoming. The divorce was painful. I won't pretend otherwise. But it also clarified something I'd been letting go soft for years. I had gotten comfortable. I'd stopped asking myself hard questions about whether I was living by the things I said I valued. The flood asked those questions for me, and I didn't like all of my answers. But I was grateful to finally hear them. The thing about integrity, real integrity, not the kind you talk about, but the kind that shows up at 5 in the morning, is that it doesn't announce itself. Irving never gave a speech about being a good father. He just showed up. Ruth never explained her philosophy of family. She just did a hair in a crisis and held onto her son's photograph. That's the whole lesson as far as I can tell. Not what you say you'll do. What you actually do when it costs you something. Nora made her choice when she heard my mother's voice on the other end of that phone and calculated whether it was worth the inconvenience. I don't hate her for it. I think she made the choice that was true to who she had quietly become over years of smaller choices. That's the part that should give all of us pause. Not the big dramatic moments, but the daily pattern of who we're deciding to be. I chose my parents. I'd make the same choice again tomorrow. And I think the man I want to be at 60, at 70, is being built right now. In the ordinary Tuesdays. In how I treat the people who cannot do anything for me except be mine. That's enough. That's everything.